The enchanted chains, forged from the molten ink of her own spell books, were a masterwork of cruel irony. They felt like ice and fire against her papery skin, a constant hum of her own stolen power. But as the trial of the dreaded Witch Queen, Morwenna, was set to begin, a single, unspoken question hung thicker than incense in the Grand Cathedral's air. Was this the final extinguishing of a dark star, or merely the first, calculated move in her most masterful deception? What would you dare to ask the woman who had once made kings tremble and shadows dance? Share your question below, before the verdict is written in blood. The weight of 60 years of rule, of 1,000 whispered secrets and 100,000 extinguished lives, seemed to press down on the solitary figure in the center of the cavernous chamber. Queen Morwenna, at 85, was a monument to eroded grandeur. Her once jet hair was a cloud of wispy white, her frame lost in the simple gray shift they had given her. But her posture was unbent, a straight spine of defiance against the world that had finally dared to cage her. And what a cage it was! The Grand Cathedral's dungeon was not some dank, dripping pit. It was a place of holy light and chilling silence, the air thick with the scent of polished stone, beeswax candles, and the faint, metallic tang of the enchanted chains binding her wrists and ankles. The chains themselves were a work of art, their silvery links inscribed with the very runes she had penned a lifetime ago, now turned against her. They glowed with a soft, malevolent light, a constant, draining presence. High above, stained glass windows depicting saints and martyrs cast fragmented rainbows across the faces of the assembled nobility. They were a sea of silk and judgment, their whispers creating a susurrus that echoed like ghostly snakes in the vast space. At the high bench of judgment sat the luminary council. Morwenna's violet eyes, the only part of her that seemed not to have aged, swept over them with detached amusement. High Inquisitor Valerius, his face a mask of grim righteousness, sat at the center. To his right was Magister Seraphine, her eyes calculating the political profit in every word. To his left, Lord General Boreas looked more weary than wrathful, and the young Oracle Anya seemed to be seeing things far beyond the stone walls. The one person Morwenna did not look at was the man sitting slightly apart, his head bowed as if in prayer. Kalen, her shadow, her spymaster, the man who had known the architecture of her soul better than any other. Now, he was the cornerstone of the case against her. The sight of him caused not a flicker of emotion on her face, but deep within, in a place the chains could not reach, a shard of ice settled in her heart. In a small, secluded alcove, partially shielded by a marble column, a young woman named Alara dipped her quill into an ink pot. Her milky, unseeing eyes were fixed on nothing, yet her head was tilted, absorbing the room in a way the sighted could not. She was the court scribe, chosen for her blindness, deemed immune to the Witch Queen's famed, mesmerizing gaze. But Alara saw with a different sense, a synesthetic perception where lies felt like sandpaper on her skin, truth like a smooth, cool stone, and power like Morwenna's was a dormant volcano, a deep, resonant thrum that made the air itself taste of ozone and old blood. The proceedings will now commence. Valerius's voice boomed, cutting through the whispers. Morwenna of the northern reaches, you stand accused of high treason against the natural order, of practicing forbidden blood magic, of enslaving free kingdoms, and of crimes against the very spirit of humanity. How do you plead? The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft scratching of Alara's quill. Morwenna did not look at Valerius. Her gaze was fixed on the middle distance, as if observing a play only she could see. I asked you a question, Valerius pressed, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bench. Slowly, deliberately, Morwenna's eyes shifted to him. They were not the eyes of a defeated old woman. They were the eyes of a queen. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of kindness or madness, but one of profound, unsettling knowledge. It was Oracle Anya who spoke next, her voice ethereal and young. The accused reserves her voice. It is her right. Let the evidence be presented. Valerius gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. Very well. We shall begin with the testimony that unraveled your web of shadows. We call upon Kalen, former spymaster of the Northern Crown. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The betrayer confronting his master. As Kaelin rose, his movements stiff with shame, Morwenna finally turned her head. Her gaze fell upon him, heavy and silent. Ilara, in her alcove, flinched. She couldn't see the look, but she felt its impact, a wave of such complex, painful emotion that it made her nauseous. It was not hatred, not even anger. It was a profound, weary disappointment, and beneath it, a thread of something else, something that felt dangerously like pity. Kaelin could not meet her gaze. He kept his eyes fixed on the polished floor as he walked to the witness stand. The sound of his footsteps, the only noise in the breathless cathedral. He was about to condemn her, to detail the darkness that had built her empire. But as Ilara sensed the torrent of grief and self-loathing rolling off him, she wondered, was he here to bury the Witch Queen, or to bury the part of himself that had once loved her? The trial had begun, but the true battle, Ilara realized with a chilling certainty, was not being fought with words. It was being fought in the silent spaces between them, in the hum of the enchanted chains, and in the deep, waiting dark behind an old queen's violet eyes. He was her shadow, her confidant, the keeper of her darkest secrets. Now, he stood to condemn her. But as Kaelin took the oath, his voice a hollow echo in the cathedral's vastness, a deeper question lingered. Could a testimony built on a foundation of shared guilt and shattered loyalty ever truly bring justice? Or was it merely the next act in a tragedy they had written together? The air in the cathedral grew heavier, if that were possible, as Kaelin settled into the witness stand. He was a man carved from grief, his once sharp features softened by a patina of regret and poor sleep. He held himself as if his very bones ached with the memory of every secret he was about to reveal. High Inquisitor Valerius began, his voice dripping with a prosecutor's relish. Kaelin, you were the Witch Queen's right hand for 3 decades. You orchestrated her network of whispers. You delivered her judgments. You stood by her as she bathed the northern realms in a tyranny of blood and shadow. Is this true? Kaelin's eyes remained downcast. I serve the crown, he murmured, the words tasting like ash. The crown was her. Valerius thundered, gesturing toward the silent Morwenna. There was no separation. So, I ask you again, will you confirm for this council the nature of the reign you enabled? A long pause. Ilara's quill hovered over the parchment. She felt the man's internal struggle as a physical pressure in the air, a storm of shame and duty. When he finally spoke, his voice was clearer, laced with a painful resolve. I will. He took a shuddering breath. The unification of the northern realms was not a diplomatic endeavor. It was a systematic campaign of terror, orchestrated by the accused. The blood rite of Kaelin Pass was not a myth. I was there. I saw her channel the life force of 100 captured soldiers into a fissure in the earth, creating a chasm of perpetual shadow that still divides the highlands to this day. Any army that tried to cross it simply vanished. A wave of horrified murmurs swept through the crowd. Lord General Boreas leaned forward, his soldier's mind grappling with the tactical horror of it. Magister Seraphine's face was a mask of cool analysis, but her fingers tightened around her amulet. The very amulet Morwenna had gifted her years ago for protection. And the vanishing of the Silverwood clan, Valerius pressed, his eyes alight. The entire noble line, gone in a single night. An act you previously attributed to a plague. A lie I helped perpetuate, Kaelin admitted, his shoulders slumping further. They possessed an ancestral artifact, a locket that could reveal any enchantment. She deemed it a threat. I delivered the poisoned wine myself. They didn't vanish. They dissolved into dust where they sat, their final screams silenced by a spell of unmaking. The details were brutal, clinical. Each confession was a hammer blow chipping away at the stone-faced image of the queen. He spoke of assassinations disguised as accidents, of binding oaths forced upon children to ensure future loyalty, of a web of control so absolute that even a whisper of dissent was snuffed out before it could truly form. Through it all, Morwenna listened. She did not react to the grisly specifics of the blood rite, nor flinch at the mention of the Silverwood clan. Her expression remained one of detached observation. as if Kalen were reciting a mildly interesting historical text about a stranger. Valerius, sensing his witness fraying, moved in for the kill. And the Night of Ashes? The event that finally turned the realms against her. The immolation of the peaceful Sunstone Monastery. Tell us, Kalen. Tell us how the Witch Queen burned 500 holy men and women to cinders for harboring a single, fleeing political rival. This was the climax. This was the crime that had broken the back of her support. Kalen paled. A tremor ran through his hands. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Alara, sensing the shift, stopped writing. The emotional resonance from Kalen was changing from grim confession to something more frantic, more conflicted. I was ordered to secure the monastery's perimeter, he said, his voice losing its steady rhythm, to ensure no one escaped, because she knew what she was about to do was monstrous. Valerius declared to the room. But I never saw her cast a spell, Kalen blurted out, almost to himself. The fire, it came from the sky, like falling stars. It was not her signature. Her magic is subtle. It twists and binds. This was raw, consuming. Valerius's triumph faltered for a fraction of a second. Are you now recanting your previous statements? Are you saying the Queen did not commit this atrocity? I am saying I did not see her do it. Kalen's voice rose, edged with a desperate frustration. I saw her arrive after the fires had begun. I saw her walk into the inferno. And why would she do that? Valerius scoffed. To gloat. To save the one they were hiding. The words tore from Kalen, a painful admission. The political rival was a child. A little girl, the last of the Sunstone bloodline. Morwenna went in to pull her out. The courtroom was plunged into a stunned silence. This was not in the official record. This was a new thread, a complicating shade of gray in a narrative that had been painted in stark black and white. Magister Seraphine finally spoke, her voice like cutting silk. And did she save the child? Kalen looked up, and for the first time, his eyes met Morwenna's. The look that passed between them was ancient and full of an unspeakable understanding. No, Kalen whispered, his defiance crumbling into utter desolation. She emerged from the flames alone. The child was lost, and she never spoke of it again. Valerius quickly regained his composure, using the moment to his advantage. So, she failed in this last-minute act of dubious mercy. It does not absolve her of the mountain of crimes you have so vividly described. It merely adds a footnote of hypocrisy. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted. The story was no longer clean. Alara, her hand trembling slightly, recorded the exchange. She felt the truth in Kalen's final statement, but also a gaping hole, an omission that screamed louder than any confession. He had told the truth, but not the whole truth. The Night of Ashes held a deeper secret, one that Kalen, even in his betrayal, was still protecting. As Kalen was led away, a broken man who had damned his queen but failed to fully damn himself, all eyes turned back to Morwenna. She had used his testimony, his very betrayal, to introduce the first crack of ambiguity into her own legend. The spymaster had given them a monster, but in his final, desperate act, he had also given them a mystery. He wore her brand like a crown of shame, a ruler forged in the fires of her dark forges. King Roderick's presence was a storm cloud of suppressed rage, his very silhouette a testament to the Witch Queen's brutal legacy. As he strode to the stand, a question hung in the air, more piercing than any blade. Can hatred, no matter how pure and justified, truly be the foundation of justice? The atmosphere, still vibrating from Kalen's fractured testimony, shifted once more. Where Kalen had been a ghost of regret, Roderick was a monument to enduring fury. He was a bull of a man, his face a landscape of old scars and newer lines of care. But it was the mark on his left cheek that held the room's attention, a raised, intricate sigil, like a brand of twisted iron, that seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent light. It was the mark of Morwenna, the sign of her direct enslavement. He did not wait for Valerius to begin. His voice, a low rumble like grinding stones, filled the chamber. You wish to know her crimes? Look no further. A thick, calloused finger stabbed toward his own cheek. This was not a punishment. It was a bill of sale. My will for her power. My people's freedom for her protection. He turned his burning gaze upon the council. The Black Iron Pact. She came to my mountain kingdom when the frost giants descended from the peaks. We were farmers, miners, not warriors. She offered a solution. Her magic would fortify our walls, imbue our weapons with a cutting cold that could pierce giant hide. The price? Every man, woman, and child of ruling blood would bear her mark. We would become her forge, producing arms and armor for her endless wars. We thought a bargain. We were fools. He spoke of the forges of his homeland, once used for crafting plows and tools, now roaring day and night with unnatural fire. The air grew thick with soot and magic. Our children were born with coughs that never healed, their eyes already old. We did not work the metal. We fed it. The forges consumed something, not just coal. It fed on our vitality, our joy. The mark, he touched it again, wincing as if it pained him. It was a conduit. It siphoned our strength to fuel her armies. We became a kingdom of living bellows. His testimony was a stark contrast to Kalen's political intrigues. This was the visceral, grinding reality of Morwenna's empire. He described watching his own father, a proud king, slowly diminish into a hollow-eyed overseer, his spirit crushed by the unending, soul-draining labor. We were not citizens. We were resource, like timber or iron ore, to be managed, consumed, and discarded. His fists clenched at his sides. I inherited a throne of ash and exhaustion. The frost giants were gone, but we were in a cage of our own making, and she held the only key. Throughout this harrowing account, Morwenna's expression had been one of mild interest, as if listening to a slightly inaccurate weather report. But as Roderick's voice broke with a mixture of rage and grief, she finally stirred. "You paint a vivid picture, King Roderick," Valerius said, his voice dripping with sympathy. "A picture of subjugation and despair. It is the truth." Roderick roared, the sound echoing off the stone pillars. It was then that Morwenna spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room's tension with the precision of a scalpel, silencing the murmurs and even Roderick's heavy breathing. All eyes snapped to her. "Your mountain passes," she began, her violet eyes fixed on him, devoid of malice, but also of remorse. "The ones that now teem with trade caravans from the southern plains. The ones that have made your cage, as you call it, the richest trade hub in the northern reaches. Who cleared them of the giant kin that had blocked them for 1,000 years. Roderick froze, his mouth slightly agape. He had not expected a question. He had come for a condemnation. "You did," he spat out. "With our forced labor. With my magic," she corrected softly. "And your survival. Before my intervention, your people's numbers were halved every winter. Your kingdom was on the brink of being scoured from the map. You speak of the price. You have never acknowledged the alternative, annihilation." She leaned forward slightly, the chains clinking softly. "The forges drained you, yes, but they also protected you. They built you. You speak of your father broken spirit, but you do not speak of the plague that did not ravage your cities because my enchantments purged the water. You do not speak of the famine that never came because the stored heat from those same forges allowed your crops to grow in perpetual winter." Her gaze was relentless. "So, I ask you, little Smith King, who rules your prosperous, powerful, and living kingdom now?" The question hung in the air, a devastating counterpoint. She had not denied his suffering. She had simply reframed it, placing it on the other side of the scale that held the total destruction of his people. It was a brutal, pragmatic calculus that sickened the holy men and idealists in the room, but gave the pragmatic Lord General Boreas pause. Roderick stood, trembling, his face a thundercloud of conflicted emotion. The raw, simple hatred he had carried like a shield was suddenly complicated. The brand on his cheek seemed to burn brighter, no longer just a mark of slavery, but a symbol of a damned, impossible choice. He had come to testify against a monster, and she had forced him to confront the savior that wore the monster's face. He had no answer. His silence was more damning to the simple narrative of good and evil than any confession could have been. The Witch Queen had taken his hatred and, with a few quiet words, had turned it into a monument to moral ambiguity. In a trial defined by hatred and grim pragmatism, one voice dared to speak of nuance. Lady Isolde of the Whispering Woods moved with a grace that seemed alien to the stark cathedral, her presence a balm on the raw nerves of the proceedings. As she took her oath, her serene eyes meeting the council's, she posed a silent challenge. In the relentless pursuit of justice, have we forgotten that even the darkest soul is capable of a single, redeeming act? High Inquisitor Valerius regarded her with open suspicion. Her name was not on his list of core witnesses. Her testimony had been insisted upon by Oracle Anya, a point of friction between the two judges. Lady Isolde, Valerius began, his tone implying she was wasting the court's time. You represent a minor, forest-bound noble house. The accused grand designs of empire largely bypassed your lands. What relevant testimony can you possibly offer? Isolde's voice was as calm and deep as the ancient wood she hailed from. I'm not here to speak of empires, Your Grace. I am here to speak of a single life. My son's. A ripple of curiosity went through the crowd. This was new. This was personal. During the Harvest War, Isolde began, her gaze growing distant. My husband, Lord Alistair, foolishly pledged his swords to the losing side. When Morwenna's victory was absolute, the edict was clear: total annihilation of all opposing bloodlines to prevent future rebellion. A scouring, they called it. She swallowed, the memory still vivid. I was with child when the black-clad soldiers surrounded our manor. We knew our fate. We could hear the pyres being built in the courtyard. Alara, in her alcove, felt a shift in the emotional resonance of the room. The collective anger and fear softened, replaced by a poignant, aching sorrow emanating from Isolde. It was a clean, sharp pain, unlike the complex turmoil of Kaelin or the raging fire of Roderick. The captain of the guard read the death warrant. My husband was executed before my eyes. I was next. Her voice never wavered, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the rail of the stand. But as they dragged me to the block, a carriage, black as a starless night and marked with the royal sigil, arrived. She emerged. Isolde's eyes finally moved to Morwenna, the witch queen herself, in the flesh. I had never seen her before. She was younger, terrifying. She walked through my courtyard as if it were her own throne room, the soldiers falling to their knees. Morwenna watched Isolde, her expression unreadable, but a faint flicker of something, recognition, passed through her eyes. She stopped before me. I was on my knees, covered in my husband's blood, shielding my swollen belly. I expected a curse, a final, cruel remark. Instead, she knelt. Her fingers, cold as ice, touched my chin and lifted my face. She looked into my eyes for a long, long time. Then she said, Isolde took a steadying breath. She said, the child's life is not his father's sin. The line of the Whispering Woods has protected the old groves since time immemorial. The land needs its stewards. A stunned silence filled the cathedral. She stood. Isolde continued, her voice thick with emotion, and she told her captain, the Lady Isolde and her heir are under my protection. Harm them, and you will beg for the mercy of a clean death. And then she left. Just like that. They cut me loose, left me in my silent, blood-soaked courtyard. They left us alone. Forever. The testimony was a thunderclap, an act of clemency, from a blood queen. Magister Seraphine was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp with skepticism. A touching story, but let us be pragmatic. The old groves you speak of are a source of rare, potent herbs used in high alchemy and healing. Is it not more likely the queen saw a valuable resource that would be lost with your line? That this was not mercy, but simple resource management? Isolde met Seraphine's gaze squarely. Perhaps, Magister, but she did not demand our fealty. She did not impose a tax or a tithe. She gave no orders. She simply let us live. She preserved a seed of a rival house out of sheer practicality, if you wish to call it that. But the result was the same. My son lives. Our line continues. And in a reign defined by absolute ruthlessness, that single inconsistency has haunted me every day of my life since. Oracle Anya spoke then, her ethereal voice filling the space Seraphine's cynicism had created. The threads of fate are not all dark or light, Inquisitor. They are woven together. To ignore a thread of silver because it lies on a black tapestry is to blind oneself to the complete picture. This testimony is not an absolution. It is a complication, and justice must be able to bear the weight of complication. Valerius scowled. A single act of calculated preservation does not wash away the blood of thousands. Does it not? Isolde asked softly, her gaze sweeping over the council before returning to Morwenna. It does for me. And for my son. You seek to paint her as a monster without nuance. But I am here, living proof that the monster has a heart. A cold, pragmatic, and perhaps even a cruel heart. But a heart that, for one moment, chose life over death. And in my world, that one moment matters more than all the edicts in the world. She stepped down from the stand, her head held high. She had not come to acquit the queen. She had come to make her human. And in doing so, she had fractured the council's unity more effectively than any defiant speech from the accused could have. As she walked back to her seat, Ilera felt a shift. The room was no longer a unified front against evil. It was now a battleground of narratives, where hatred was forced to sit uncomfortably next to gratitude, and justice was beginning to look like an impossibly tangled knot. The witch queen, still silent, had once again managed to weaponize a testimony against her. This time, she had used an act of mercy as her shield. Brother Theron saw not a queen, but a demon to be purged. His fanaticism was a cold flame, threatening to turn the solemn trial into a holy inquisition. As he took his place, his eyes burning with righteous fire, a disturbing question settled over the proceedings. In the sacred darkness of the dungeon, who was the true monster? The prisoner accused of sins, or the jailer who believed his cruelty was divine will? Where previous witnesses had brought emotion and complexity, Brother Theron brought a chilling certainty. He was a gaunt man, his face all sharp angles and deep-set eyes, his robes hanging off his frame like a shroud. He smelled of incense, and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, the scent of the holy oils he used to anoint Morwenna's cell. The accused is not merely a political criminal, Theron began, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to suck the moisture from the air. She is a spiritual pollutant, a blight upon the soul of the realm. Her very presence in the holy confines of this cathedral is a desecration that must be scrubbed clean with prayer and penitence. High Inquisitor Valerius nodded in grim agreement. Describe the measures you have taken to contain this pollution, brother. The chains, blessed by the High Pontiff himself, are but the first layer, Theron explained, his gaze fixed on Morwenna with undisguised loathing. Her cell is warded with sigils of binding, etched into the stone with silver and sanctified water. Every 6 hours, the air is cleansed with burning hymnal incense. Her food is sprinkled with ash from the sacred groves to purify it of any latent enchantment she may try to weave. He spoke of his duties not as a warden, but as an exorcist. He described how he would stand outside her cell for hours, reciting scriptures of banishment, watching her for any sign of weakness, any flicker of the demonic power he was sure lurked within her frail shell. And has the prisoner shown any reaction to these holy rites? Valerius prompted. Only a blasphemous indifference. Theron's composure cracked for a second, a flash of frustration in his eyes. She sits. She meditates. Sometimes she smiles, as if our most sacred rituals are a mildly amusing diversion. It is a mockery of the divine. Ilera, from her alcove, felt a profound discomfort. The emotional resonance coming from Theron was not the hot anger of Roderick or the cold grief of Kaelin. It was a void, a sterile, consuming fervor that felt more dangerous than any passion. She also sensed something else, a low, constant hum of power from the direction of Morwenna's cell that seemed to pulse in time with Theron's descriptions, as if feeding on the very energy of his zeal. Tell us, brother, Magister Seraphine interjected, her tone laced with a practical curiosity. In your extensive observations, has the prisoner attempted to use her magic? Has she tried to break her bonds? The wards hold, Theron declared, though it sounded more like a plea than a statement of fact. But the darkness within her is cunning. It does not assault the walls head-on. It seeps. Just yesterday, I found a patch of moss growing in the corner of her cell, a vibrant, unnatural green, despite the absence of light and water. I burned it immediately. It was a probe, an attempt to find a weakness in our sanctity. He was painting a picture of a constant, silent war being waged in the dungeon, a battle of wills between his faith and her corruption. It was a narrative that clearly resonated with Valerius and the more devout members of the audience. It was then that Captain Finian, the head of the cathedral guard, who had been standing stoically by the main doors, shifted his weight. His face, usually a mask of professional neutrality, was troubled. When Oracle Anya, her voice gentle yet firm, spoke next, she addressed him directly. "Captain Finian," she said, turning all eyes to him, "you oversee the security of the dungeon. From a practical standpoint, have you witnessed any of these manifestations of power Brother Theron describes?" Finian hesitated, his loyalty to the cathedral hierarchy warring with his soldier's honesty. "I have seen the moss, Your Eminence," he admitted carefully, "and I have felt a pressure in the air outside her cell, but I cannot attest to its source being magical." He chose his next words with extreme care. "I have also observed that Brother Theron has, on my last 3 nightly inspections, denied the prisoner water, citing the need for spiritual dehydration to weaken her connection to the dark arts." A sharp intake of breath came from several in the crowd. Brother Theron's face flushed with angry blotches. "A necessary measure. The body must be weakened to save the soul from its demonic tenant." "The prisoner is an 85-year-old woman," Captain Finian replied, his voice low but clear, the soldier's pragmatism clashing with the fanatic's dogma. "My duty is to ensure she lives to face judgment. Denying water risks failing in that duty." The clash was no longer about Morwenna's past crimes, but about the methods of her present captivity. Theron's testimony had backfired spectacularly. In his zeal to prove her evil, he had exposed his own. He had not provided evidence of her power, but had instead revealed the depths of his own obsession, an obsession that was now being questioned by the very institution he served. Morwenna, for her part, watched this exchange with the same detached interest she had shown for all the others. But as her eyes met Captain Finian's for a fleeting moment, Ilaris sensed it, a flicker of something that was not gratitude, but acknowledgement, a silent recognition of a man simply doing his job with a shred of humanity. Brother Theron was dismissed, his testimony having sown as much doubt about the jailers as it had about the prisoner. The warden's zeal had not fortified the case against the Witch Queen. It had merely illuminated the darkness that could fester in the hearts of those who fought in the name of light. The trial was no longer just about judging a queen's past, but about examining the soul of the very system that sought to judge her. The man who emerged from the side chamber was not what the stories described. He was not a hulking brute draped in shadows, but a man of average height and build, dressed in the simple, gray robes of a monastic scribe. His face was plain, forgettable. It was his eyes that betrayed him. They were the color of a winter sky, just before a storm, and they held a stillness so absolute it felt more threatening than any glare. This was Silas, the Shadow, the most feared man in the realms, and Morwenna's personal blade for 2 decades. His entrance sucked the sound from the room more effectively than a spell. High Inquisitor Valerius, for the first time, looked visibly uneasy. Producing Silas had been a desperate gamble, a move pushed by the more radical elements of the court. The Shadow was a weapon that could cut both ways. "Silas," Valerius began, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence, "you have been granted immunity in exchange for your unique testimony. This council understands you were the instrument of the accused on many occasions. We wish to know the nature of those assignments." Silas did not look at Valerius. His gaze was fixed on Morwenna, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was not a friendly sight. "An instrument is a passive thing, Inquisitor," he said, his voice a low, smooth monotone that carried to every corner of the hall. "A hammer does not choose where it strikes. I was not a hammer. I was a sculptor, and the Queen and I, we sculpted the realm together." His testimony began, and it was a masterclass in controlled terror. He did not boast. He simply stated facts, each one more chilling than the last. He described the assassination of the Duke of Evermore not as a murder, but as the resolution of a territorial dispute. The poisoning of the entire Ashgard line was a preemptive pruning to prevent a civil war. He spoke of secrets, of blackmail, of perfectly staged accidents that removed obstacles from Morwenna's path with the clean, efficient finality of a surgeon's knife. "The target is not just the body," he explained, his wintry eyes scanning the horrified faces of the nobility, many of whom were suddenly re-evaluating long-ago tragedies in their own families. "It is the legacy, the memory. Sometimes, a name must be erased so completely that it becomes a cautionary tale whispered to children. That was my specialty." He was confirming every dark rumor, validating every fear. This was the undeniable, visceral truth of Morwenna's reign, spoken by the man who had personally delivered it. Valerius began to regain his composure, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. This was the final nail in the Witch Queen's coffin. But then, Silas turned his gaze from Morwenna and let it drift slowly over the luminary council itself. "Of course," he continued, his tone conversational, "to maintain the balance of power, one must sometimes assist potential allies, even before they know they need assistance." Magister Seraphine, who had been watching with cool detachment, went very still. "For instance," Silas said, his eyes settling on her, "the unfortunate hunting accident that befell Magister Seraphine's primary rival for her seat on this very council, Lord Valerius. A stray arrow from a poacher's bow, I believe the report said. A tragic loss." The blood drained from Seraphine's face. Her hand, which had been resting on the bench, clenched into a white-knuckled fist. "And the mysterious fire that destroyed the trade ledgers of House Boreas," Silas continued, his gaze shifting to the Lord General, whose weary eyes were now wide with dawning horror. "Ledgers that would have revealed certain, undeclared tariffs. A fortunate coincidence that allowed the House to avoid a rather significant scandal and financial ruin, was it not?" He was no longer testifying against Morwenna. He was testifying against everyone. He was revealing that the foundations of the current power structure were built with bricks of blood and mortar of deceit, all laid by his hand, under Morwenna's orders. The immunity he had been granted was a shield he was using to detonate a bomb in the heart of the court. The Witch Queen's web did not just ensnare her enemies, Silas concluded, his voice dropping to an intimate, poisonous whisper. It supported her friends, willingly or not. You sit in judgment of the architect, but you reside in the house she built. Every one of you. The courtroom descended into pandemonium. Nobles were on their feet, shouting accusations and denials. Seraphine was whispering furiously to an aide, while Lord General Boreas looked as if he had been physically struck. Even High Inquisitor Valerius was speechless, his case in ruins, his own allies implicated. Through the chaos, Morwenna remained still. But this time, her detachment felt different. It was not the calm of a prisoner, but the patience of a spider whose web, though she was caught in the center, was still vibrating exactly as she had anticipated. Alara, overwhelmed by the torrent of panic, guilt, and fury crashing through the room, dropped her quill. The emotional noise was deafening to her senses. She realized Silas's true purpose. He had not come to condemn the queen. He had come to expose the hypocrisy of the entire system. He had made it impossible for the council to pass a clean judgment, because his testimony had proven they were all, in some way, beneficiaries of the very darkness they now pretended to abhor. The shadow had not cast his testimony upon the accused. He had cast it upon the judges, and in doing so, he had thrown the entire trial into a moral abyss from which it might never climb out. The question was no longer whether Morwenna was guilty. The question was whether anyone in the room had the right to declare her so. The chaos sown by the shadow's testimony took nearly an hour to subside. The air was thick with accusation and paranoia. The luminary council was fractured, its members avoiding each other's eyes. It was into this maelstrom of shattered certainties that Morwenna, the Witch Queen, finally chose to speak. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited for the last angry whisper to die, her violet eyes sweeping over the assembled lords and ladies, the shaken judges, the terrified guards. When she spoke, her voice was not the brittle rasp of an old woman, but a low, resonant tone that carried the weight of 6 decades of absolute rule. It was a voice that commanded not through volume, but through sheer, undeniable presence. "You seek a confession," she began, her gaze lingering on Valerius. "You have listened to tales of blood and shadow, and you believe you have seen the whole of the tapestry. But you have only seen the dark threads. You have never asked why the loom was built in the first place." She leaned back, the chains clinking softly, a sound that now seemed less like a restraint and more like an accent to her words. You speak of the realm I enslaved. You did not see the realm I inherited. A carcass, picked clean by 100 squabbling lords. A land drowning in its own blood, with winter wolves at the gate and rot in the heart. The northern wastes were not empty. They were waiting. And what was coming from those wastes would have made my reign look like a golden age of peace. She was no longer defending her actions. She was reframing them entirely. The blood right of Kalen Pass, she said, her eyes finding Kalen, who flinched. You call it crime. I call a necessary wall. The energy of 100 soldiers, yes. To power a war that has held back the gnawing silence for 60 years. A blight that does not kill, but unmakes. It erases memory, well, identity. It would have turned you all into husks, wandering a gray land until your bodies crumbled to dust. Should I have let through? Should I have sought a more humane solution while your children forgot their own names? Her words painted a picture not of a tyrant, but of a desperate general on a battlefield where every choice led to damnation. The Silverwood clan, she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, bitter edge. Their artifact was no simple trinket. It was a key to a lock that should never be turned. They believed they could control what lay behind it. They were fools playing with a fire that would have consumed reality itself. I offered them wealth, exile, anything to give it up. They refused. So I made a choice. Their line, or all lines. I chose you. All of you. She turned her gaze to Roderick, the branded king. You speak of the forges draining your people. And this is true. I used you. But I also saved you. The same energy that powered my war machines also powered the great wardstones at the border. Your suffering, as real and as terrible as it was, purchased the safety of the entire southern continent. It was a brutal arithmetic, the kind you never had to learn from your gilded palaces. Finally, she looked at Lady Isolde. Mercy, she said, and the word was a soft sigh. You call it mercy. I saw a lineage that held a covenant with the land itself, a living anchor for the natural order. To destroy it would have been to wound the world in a way even I could not repair. It was not kindness. It was preservation on a scale you cannot comprehend. She was building a terrifying narrative. Every atrocity, every act of cruelty was being repositioned as a strategic, albeit horrific, necessity in a war against an unseen, existential enemy. She was not denying the darkness. She was claiming it as her weapon, her shield. In the night of ashes, Valerius managed to croak out, seizing on the one event that seemed unexplainable. The Sunstone Monastery. 500 souls. What necessary evil was that? What great threat were those holy men and women? For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed Morwenna's face. It was not guilt, but a profound, weary sorrow. The child, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the silent hall. The one Kayla mentioned. She was not a political rival. She was a vessel. The gnawing silence, unable to break my wards, had found a crack. It had touched her in the womb. She was a beacon, a doorway. The monastery was not burning her. They were worshiping her. The fire that fell from the sky. That was not my magic. It was theirs. A ritual to fully open the door and unleash what was inside her into our world. She looked at Kaylin, her eyes full of an old, shared pain. I went to try to pull her out, to sever the connection, but I was too late. The thing inside her was already waking, so I did the only thing I could. I contained it. I sealed the child, the monster, the doorway, and the 500 acolytes feeding it in a tomb of eternal fire. I did not burn the monastery, Inquisitor. I buried the infection so the rest of the body could live. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview being dismantled and rebuilt into something far more terrifying. She had not offered a defense. She had offered a confession of a different kind, a confession of a lifetime spent making choices no one should ever have to make. She had taken the mantle of the monster and draped it over the shoulders of Savior. A damned Savior, a brutal Savior, but a Savior nonetheless. The question in the room was no longer, is she guilty, but what would we have done in her place? The Witch Queen had not just spoken in her own defense. She had put the entire world on trial. Silence. It was not the quiet of respect or anticipation, but the deep, ringing silence of a world turned upside down. Morwenna's words hung in the air, not as a plea, but as a verdict upon her accusers. In the stunned void that followed, the only movement was the frantic scratching of Alara's quill as she tried to capture the seismic shift that had just occurred. But Alara was not just transcribing words. She was drowning in a sea of sensation. The emotional resonance of the room was a cacophony. The crumbling certainty of Valerius, the cold, recalculating ambition of Seraphine, the profound, weary validation from Boreas, and the swirling, conflicted maelstrom from the audience. It was overwhelming, a deafening roar in her mind's ear. She focused on the one point of stillness in the storm, Morwenna. The queen had resumed her posture of detached observation, but to Alara's unique sense, she was now the calm, pulsing eye of the hurricane. And the chains, Alara's attention, almost against her will, was drawn to the enchanted manacles. Before, they had felt like a drain, a muffling presence. Now, as she concentrated, she perceived them differently. They weren't just containing power, they were channeling it. A complex, invisible lattice of energy flowed from the courtroom, from the fear, the anger, the doubt, the fervent hope for punishment, and the chains were drinking it, pulling it in like roots sucking moisture from soil. The energy didn't vanish. It was being refined, concentrated, and fed back into the frail figure at its center. The trial wasn't sapping her strength. It was a ritual to restore it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered Brother Theron's fanatical rites, his attempts to cleanse the cell. She saw now that his fervor had been just another potent fuel source. She remembered Silas's testimony, deliberately engineered to create the maximum emotional turmoil. It was all by design. Every word, every accusation, every tear shed in this courtroom was a brick in the edifice of Morwenna's returning power. Her mind raced, piecing together the clues her blindness had forced her to see. The unnatural moss in the cell, not a probe, but a byproduct of the immense life force being gathered. The pressure Captain Finian felt, the sheer density of the magical energy coalescing around the queen. The judge's protective amulets, her own creations, glowing faintly not to protect them, but to act as anchors in the web, ensuring the energy flow remained stable and directed. She's using us, Alara realized, a cold terror seizing her. The judges, the witnesses, the crowd, were not the audience. We're the sacrifice. Her duty warred with her survival instinct. She was a scribe, meant to record, not to intervene. But to record this and do nothing was to be complicit in whatever cataclysm was coming. As the council began to argue in hushed, frantic tones about how to proceed, Alara made a decision. She carefully set down her quill. Using the marble column for cover, she felt her way along the wall, away from her alcove, towards the one person in the room whose emotional resonance felt like solid ground amidst the shifting sands, Captain Finian. She found him standing at his post, his posture rigid, but his emotional signature a swirl of confusion and duty. "Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He started, looking down at the blind scribe who had seemingly appeared from nowhere. "Mistress Alara, you should be at your station." The chains, she breathed, urgency giving her voice strength. "They are not what you think. They are not a cage. They are a conduit. She is feeding on the trial. On all of us." Finian stared at her, his practical mind struggling to grasp the mystical concept. "What are you talking about?" "Think, Captain. The moss. The pressure you feel. The amulets. It's all connected. This entire proceeding, it's a spell. When the verdict is read, when the emotional peak is reached." She trailed off, letting him finish the thought. She could feel the shift in him as a soldier's mind connected the dots. Brother Theron's zeal, Silas's chaos, Morwenna's shocking defense. It all fit a pattern of escalating tension. It was a military campaign fought on a psychological battlefield. "By the gods," he muttered, his hand going instinctively to the hilt of his sword. His eyes darted to the witch queen, who sat serenely, and then to the enchanted chains, which to him looked no different than before. But he trusted the perception of the one person in the room who saw in a way he could not. "What do we do?" "We have to stop the verdict," Alara said, her mind racing. We have to break the pattern, disperse the energy. If they pronounce the sentence, she didn't need to finish. The grim understanding on Finian's face was enough. He gave a sharp, barely perceptible nod. His duty was to protect the cathedral and its inhabitants. If the trial itself was a weapon aimed at them all, then his duty was clear. But as he took a step forward, High Inquisitor Valerius slammed his fist on the bench, restoring a brittle order. "The court will reconvene in 1 hour to deliver its judgment," he declared, his voice cracking with strain. "The accused will be returned to her cell to await the verdict." It was too late. The ritual had reached its final stage. The energy in the room was at a fever pitch, a dam about to break. As the guards moved to escort Morwenna away, Alara sensed the queen's satisfaction, a dark, sweet wave of triumph. The final move was upon them, and they were all out of time. The scribe's vision had come too late. The hour of recess was the longest of Alara's life. The cathedral felt like a pot about to boil over. Whispers slithered through the shadows, alliances fractured and reformed in frantic huddles, and the air grew thick with a palpable, metallic charge, like the moment before a lightning strike. Captain Finian had quietly passed the warning to his most trusted guards, their hands now resting uneasily on their sword hilts, their eyes scanning not for external threats, but for the danger festering in their midst. When the luminary council filed back in, their faces were a mosaic of grim resolution and poorly concealed fear. The fragile unity needed for a verdict had been shattered by Silas's revelations and Morwenna's defense. They were a body at war with itself. High Inquisitor Valerius stood. He held a scroll, the verdict, but his hand trembled slightly. He did not look at his fellow judges. He looked only at Morwenna, his hatred a final, desperate anchor in the swirling chaos. Morwenna of the northern reaches. His voice boomed, but it was a strained echo of its former authority. "This council has heard the testimony. We have witnessed the depth of your crimes, and we have listened to your justifications." He unrolled the scroll. The silence was so absolute that the rustle of parchment sounded like a thunderclap. "For the crimes of high treason, blood magic, enslavement, and crimes against the spirit of humanity, this council finds you." Alara held her breath. Finian's knuckles were white on his sword. The enchanted chains around Morwenna's wrists began to glow, not with their usual soft light, but with a fierce, hungry intensity. "Guilty." The word exploded in the chamber, followed by a collective, sharp intake of breath. "The sentence is death," Valerius proclaimed, his voice gaining a fervent, almost hysterical strength. "To be carried out by public beheading at dawn, that your shadow may be forever banished from this realm." It was the peak, the culmination of all the fear, the anger, the hope for retribution. A roar of approval, mixed with cries of protest, erupted from the crowd. The emotional energy in the room crested, a tidal wave of pure, undiluted force. And the chain shattered. It was not a violent explosion of metal, but a sublime, terrifying dissolution. The silvery links, forged from her own spell books, glowed white-hot for a single, blinding moment, and then vaporized into a million motes of shimmering dust. They did not break from brute force. They completed their purpose. The ritual was over. The cage door was open. Morwenna rose. It was not the slow, pained movement of an old woman. It was a fluid, uncoiling of power. She stood to her full height, and the very air around her seemed to warp and bend. The frail, gray-clad prisoner was gone. In her place stood the Witch Queen, reborn. Her white hair seemed to crackle with static energy, and her violet eyes blazed with a light that had not been seen in 60 years. The power she had siphoned from the trial, from their hatred, their fear, their very judgment, swirled around her in a visible vortex of shimmering, dark light. "You are correct, Inquisitor," she said, and her voice was no longer a single tone, but a chorus of whispers, the echoes of every secret ever told in her court. "A shadow will be banished from this realm today, but is not mine." She raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture of reclamation. All around the room, the protective amulets worn by the judges and many nobles, the amulets she had created, flared with a violent purple light. They were not shields. They were shackles. With a series of sickening cracks, the amulets tightened, not against flesh, but against the will of their wearers. Valerius, Seraphine, Boreas, they all gasped, their bodies seizing up, their eyes wide with terror as they found themselves frozen, prisoners in their own bodies. The puppet masters had become puppets. Panic erupted in earnest. Nobles scrambled for the doors, only to find them sealed shut by barriers of solid shadow. Guards drew their swords, but the blades grew cold and brittle in their hands, shattering at the slightest touch. Morwenna's gaze swept over the chaos, a sculptor surveying her raw material. You sought to judge the architect for the strength of the walls that kept the wolves at bay. You never asked what would happen if you tore them down. You have gathered all the power of this realm in one room, all its rulers, all its strength. You have handed me the keys to my own cage and the fuel to break it. And for that, you have my gratitude. The trial was over. The true judgment was just beginning. Power, raw and terrifying, pulsed through the Grand Cathedral. It was a physical weight, pressing the air from lungs, bowing the heads of the terrified nobility. The Witch Queen stood at the center of the storm, a reborn deity of shadow and consequence. The frozen forms of the Luminary Council were her grisly courtiers, their eyes screaming what their mouths could not. This was the moment every horror story had warned of. The monster, unchained, poised for a final, bloody vengeance. Captain Finian shoved Alara behind him, his broken sword held in a shaking hand, a futile but noble gesture against the impossible. "Stay behind me," he barked, his voice the only note of defiance in the choir of whimpers. Morwenna's multitudinous gaze fell upon him, and then upon the blind scribe peering from behind his shoulder. A flicker of something, not anger, not malice, crossed her features. It looked like recognition. She did not raise a hand to smite them. She did not call down pillars of fire. Instead, she took a single, slow step forward, the vortex of energy around her calming from a maelstrom to a shimmering mantle. For 60 years, her voice echoed, the whisper chorus softer now. I held the line. I made choices that would curdle your souls, because the alternative was a silence that would unmake them entirely. I became the monster so you could remain human. Her eyes swept over the cowering, tear-streaked faces. And in the end, this is what you chose with your hard-won safety. Petty squabbles, hypocritical judgments, a return to the very weakness that nearly doomed you all. She stopped before the frozen form of High Inquisitor Valerius. You wanted a world without my shadow. You believed the light would simply flood in to take its place. She leaned close, her voice a whisper for him alone, yet heard by all. But you never asked what the light would reveal, or what still lurks in the corners, waiting for the shadows to fade. She straightened up, turning her back on him, as if he were already irrelevant. Her gaze then fell upon Kalen, who had not fled, but simply knelt, head bowed, awaiting an end he believed he deserved. "And you, my old friend," she said, her voice shedding its echo, becoming, for a moment, simply that of an old, tired woman. "You thought betrayal was your penance, but your true failure was losing faith. You saw the cost and forgot the purpose." Finally, she looked at Alara, who, though blind, met the gaze unflinchingly, her unique sense overwhelmed by the terrifying, beautiful, and tragic symphony of the Queen's presence. "And you, little scribe, you who sees without sight, you understand, don't you? The final, bitter irony. To save them, I must be the monster. To be their savior, I must be their villain." She raised her hands, not in a gesture of spell casting, but of offering. The immense power she had gathered from the trial, the fear, the hatred, the ambition, coalesced above her palms, a star of captured night. "This is the culmination of my reign," she declared to the silent hall. "The power you all gave me. With it, I could burn this cathedral to the ground and from its ashes raise a new empire, silent and absolute. I could erase your minds and make you willing servants. I could ensure my peace through a tyranny that would make my past reign seem benevolent." She paused, letting the horror of those possibilities sink in. "Or," she said, and her voice was now utterly, profoundly alone, "I could do the one thing no one has ever expected from me. The one thing that will be my true, final trial." She closed her eyes. The star of power above her hands compressed, brightened, and then shattered not outwards, but inwards. It streamed away from her, not in an attack, but in a release. The purple light fled from the amulets of the council, which crumbled to dust. The shadow barriers on the doors dissolved. The oppressive weight in the air vanished. Morwenna swayed, her form seeming to shrink, the vibrant power gone from her eyes, leaving only the fatigue of an 85-year-old woman. The Witch Queen was gone. Only Morwenna remained. "I offer you a covenant," she said, her voice raspy and weak. "Not of fear, but of memory. Remember the cost. Remember the choices. Remember the face of what held the door closed. I will not rule you. I will go to my true prison, forged not from spell books, but from your vigilance. A prison where I can watch and wait for the day you forget the lessons written in blood and shadow. The day you will need me again." She knelt, not in submission, but in exhaustion, her head bowed. The choice was no longer hers. She had spent her power not on vengeance, but on abdication. She had given them back their future. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of terror, but of awe and of a staggering, unbearable responsibility. The crown she offered was not of gold or shadow, but of ashes and dawn. And as the first rays of the morning sun pierced the stained glass windows, illuminating the kneeling queen and the stunned faces of her would-be executioners, it was clear that the trial was over, but the judgment of this day would echo for 1,000 years. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.